We will solve the following exercise. The exercise is in number 2.46. 4 groups engage in a tug-of-war. The magnitudes of the forces exerted by groups B, C, and D are FB equals 800 pounds, FC equals 1000 pounds, and FD equals 900 pounds. If the vector sum of the 4 forces equals 0, what is the magnitude of FA and the angle alpha? Right, so first, as always, I'm going to solve the exercise. Second, explain what was needed for me to solve it. As I always recommend, please, for you to save time during tests, during exercises, please use the image that the exercise is providing, right? Due to the time, you are going to be able to take advantage of it. Now, FB equals 800 pounds. FC equals 1000. FD equals 900 pounds. Right, so the first thing that I want to do is to transform those vectors into, well, write down the vectors actually. I'm going to use the angle, and it depends on the direction. I'm going to use cosine or sine, right? So please bear with me. FB as a vector equals 800 pounds minus 800 pounds multiplied by the cosine of 70 along the I direction plus 800 multiplied by the sine 70 along the J direction. Righty. Now FC equals 1000 multiplied by the cosine of 70, nope, 30 along the I direction plus 1000 multiplied by the sine of 30 on the J direction. FD equals 900 negative, positive multiplied by the cosine of 20 on the I direction minus 900 multiplied by the sine of 20 on the J direction. And finally, FA equals negative magnitude multiplied by the cosine of alpha on the I direction minus, once again, the magnitude multiplied by the sine of alpha on the J direction. Right, so we have the 4 vectors using the components, and what comes next is to develop summatory of forces along the x-axis and along the y-axis. So let me close this. Bear with me. Bear with me once again. Just forget it. Alrighty. So, summatory of forces along the x-axis, and along this direction it is going to be positive. Remember, you have to write down along which axis is going to be, which direction, sorry, is going to be positive or negative. My professor used to say you have to write down the name and last name, right, of the requirement that we have to meet. In this case, summatory of forces along the x-axis is equal to 0. Now, we already write down all the information that was needed for me to write down the summatory of forces. So I'm just going to use information of this column. Minus 800 multiplied by the cosine of 70 plus 1000 multiplied by the cosine of 30 plus 900 multiplied by the cosine of 20, and finally minus the magnitude of the vector multiplied by the cosine of alpha, and this is equal to 0. This equation is going to be named equation number 1. Now, we need to solve two unknowns, or we need to find two unknowns. The first one is the magnitude of the vector, and the second one is the angle. For you to solve two unknowns, or for you to determine or find two unknowns, you have to use two different equations. You have to remember that. For you to solve a specific number of unknowns, you have to have at least the same number of equations. If you do not have the same number of equations, or the number of equations that you have is below the number of unknowns that you need to determine, then you cannot solve the exercise. If it's above the number, of course you can do it. So we have two unknowns and just one equation, sorry. We have to determine another one, and as you may be thinking, we're going to use the summatory of forces along the y-axis. Once again, name and last name. So this is going to be called my equation number 2, and we're going to use the second column. So 800 multiplied by the sine of 70 plus 1000 multiplied by the sine of 30 minus 900 sine of 20 minus the magnitude of the vector FA multiplied by the sine of alpha. It looks good. Yeah, it looks good. This is equal to 0, and this is going to be called my equation number 2. Now, at this point, we are going to use the calculator for us to determine this number. I don't want to write down every time that huge amount of numbers. So minus 800 cosine of 70 plus 1000 cosine of 30 plus 900 cosine of 20 is equal to this, and I'm going to save that information within the calculator, specifically within the A spot. So for when I look for A, it is going to show me that result. So write it down once again, my equation number 1. It is going to be equal to A minus FA cosine of alpha equals 0. Of course, you have to take into account that this is within the calculator. Now, The same thing goes for the equation number 2. 800 sine of 70 plus 1000 actually is the same. Nope. 1000 sine of 30 minus 900 sine of 20. Got it. And I'm going to save this within B. Righty, so it is going to be equal to B, sorry, in black, B minus FA sine of alpha equals 0. Now, we have two equations to announce the problem is solved. First, I'm going to use the equation number 1. So from equation 1, and I'm going to solve the equation for, I don't know, for alpha. I don't really care. I can solve it for FA or I can solve it for alpha. So I don't know, for alpha. So A minus FA cosine of alpha equals 0. Once again, the same equation. And A equals these, righty, A divided by FA, cosine to the minus 1 power of this is equal to alpha. Righty, and this is going to be my equation number 3. Now I'm going to replace 3 within 2, which is the equation that I have not used just yet. B minus FA multiplied by the sine of the cosine minus 1 power. I think it's pretty complicated to solve this equation for alpha. Let's change it. I'm going to solve the equation for FA. So in this case, A equals righty cosine of alpha equals FA. It's much simpler. So now I'm going to use the same thing, replace 3 within 2, and it is going to be B minus A divided by the cosine of alpha multiplied by the sine of alpha equals 0. Now B is going to be equal to the same stuff. Righty, remember that this is the same thing as having this, and sine over cosine is equal to tangent. So B equals A divided by 1, well, which is A, multiplied by the tangent of alpha. And finally, alpha equals the tangent to the minus 1 power of b over a, which is equal to b over a, 33.2793. Remember that I always use 4 significant digits after the point. And we have the first answer. Now, in the case of the second answer, we already have an equation, which is this one. Let me copy and paste right here. So I'm going to save this result within C. That means that FA, or at least the magnitude of FA, equals A divided by the cosine of C. What happened? A divided by the cosine of C. 1720.2443 pounds. Now, what was needed for me to solve this exercise? First, of course, you have to take into consideration that for every single vector you have to use two things. The first one is the magnitude and the second one is the direction. So by using the components, you're going to be able to determine the direction. For example, in the case of FB, the first component is going to be this one, right? The y component. And the y component is going to be given by the sine of the angle. Why the sine? Because remember that in the case of sine, you are using the opposite cathetus of the triangle. And the opposite cathetus of the triangle is this one. Remember, the angle is this one, the opposite is the opposite, actually. Now, in the case of the x-axis, you're going to use cosine. Why is that? Because cosine uses the adjacent cathetus of the triangle. That's how you have to determine every single one of the vectors. Now, by having all that information, you're going to create a summatory of forces along the x-axis and the y-axis. Sometimes you're going to use the summatory of momentum, but in this case it was not necessary. Why is that? Because we, as I mentioned before, we had two unknowns and we only needed two equations for us to solve the exercise. Therefore, you're going to be able to solve the exercise by just using the information of the first and second column. Now, you have to be pretty careful for when you are using the information of the calculator. During a test, I do not recommend to do this because you're going to be stressed and maybe you're going to be forgetting what you saved. Alright? It is better for you to write down the result of this summatory, righty, and that way you're not going to be confused during the exercise. I did it because it is simpler for me since I have the resources. I have the computer and my iPad and everything else for me to just solve the exercise, and I'm not stress doing so. And well, this is pretty, I'm not going to say simple, because it could be difficult for some of you. It was for me. But you just have to follow a methodology in which you're going to solve one's equation and start replacing using the equations that you have not used. And that's it, guys. This is how you can solve this exercise.